Looking at marriage and family. For the new ones that are here, last night we spent some time looking at sin. We looked at the condition of the world in which we live today and see a lot of the hardships that our people are going through. And throughout this entire series, as I set the foundation last night, to let everybody know that we have to intermingle, we have to intertwine Jesus Christ into our relationships. Even through our marriage, you've got so many people today that are just throwing in the towel. Just give up. And I believe there is not a triune relationship that's taking place inside that marriage. So we're going to be spending some time tonight looking at a lot of different things. We're going to look at nuts and bolts. We're going to look at specific things. We're going to look at probabilities. And again, I want to share with you this. As we look at some of these statistics and things that are going on inside of the marriage, and marriages that are working and marriages that are not working, and looking at all these different things, I want you to recognize that even though it's a statistic, that if Christ is wound into your relationship, you can overcome many of those things, if not all of those things. Because again, as we saw last night, we were trying to explain that God is great. God is grand, right? And if we can do anything through Him, then that means we can overcome no matter what it is. It doesn't matter what it is. Sometimes people have really difficult situations that they have in their marriages. And they say, well, the Bible says that, hey, I have the right to leave. And it's true, you do. But at the same time, if Christ is interwound in your relationship, you say, you know what? We're going to work through this. And we're going to see some statistics to really show what the marriage looks like if you continue to work with the relationship of Christ through this thing. So we're going to be spending some time looking at that. Because one of the things we recognize is perfect marriage doesn't exist. Let's just get that straight out now, okay? There is no perfect marriage. Those of you that have been married a lot longer than I have, you recognize that things are difficult. Things are hard. There is no perfect marriage. But one of the things we're going to find that has to be there, it's a necessary component, is communication. And communication is not you talking to your spouse, okay? Communication is a two-way street. It's you talking to your spouse, and your spouse talking to you. It's not you working on something while your spouse is talking to you behind you. There is intermingling, there's communication. We're going to see those things. And so these kind of things happen, don't they? I don't know how many of you have gone to sleep at night and you looked on, opposite directions, the not-so-perfect marriage. These are kind of things that happen. So it's not perfect. This one here, I love this. It says the secret of a perfect marriage, what does it say? Still remains a secret. Okay, so there is no, answer to everything that's perfect out there. I like this here. It says that a perfect marriage is just two imperfect people who refuse to give up on each other. I think that's important. It's two imperfect people refusing to give up on each other. And so when you go back to the Garden of Eden, we looked at a little bit this last night, but among the many blessings that God has showered upon us in Christ is the blessing of marriage, a gift bestowed by the Creator from the creation of the human race. And I shared with you that, think about it. When you look at heaven, you've got a triune relationship, right? Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. And in our marriage relationship, we are mirroring that which God has given us. And what is it? Husband, wife, and has to be interwound. He's given us what to do. At the same time, we are troubled by the facts that far too many people do not understand what it means to say that marriage is a blessing and a gift from God. Often when people think of the first sin, they think of Eve eating the fruit in the Garden of Eden. They think that's what the sin was. But in reality, that wasn't the sin. That may have sealed the fate of what she had done, but that wasn't her sin. It was when Eve separated herself from her husband. While occupied in the daily labor in the garden, with him she would have been in less danger from temptation than if she were alone. So it's not saying that the husband is the answer. What the answer is you're staying together. And what was the thing that Jesus did with them often in the garden? It says that he walked with them, right? So there's that relationship right there. Jesus coming and walking with the two of them in the garden. There's that relationship. And so it was because that she separated herself from her husband that she got into trouble. Even if she was unconsciously, that she wandered from his side and found herself alone and in danger, she could have what? She could have retraced her steps. She could have recognized that something, but what'd she do? She said, well, I'm okay. I can handle this. And she got herself in trouble. But she must have, dismissed her fears and decided that she had sufficient wisdom and strength to discern evil and to withstand it. And it's the same thing for us. Oftentimes in our marriages and in our relationships, we think, I can take care of this. Even though there is some situation that's going on with my spouse, I'm just going to leave it alone. And I can handle this. I can deal with this. I can live with this. And there's no open communication between each other. So that's very important. And so sin introduced disorder into the world. It introduced disorder into the marriage relationship. And as a consequence, sin ruptured the original communion between man and woman. So what was once this beautiful experience, this beautiful relationship, it's been ruined. It's been introduced with disorder. And not only did it do it between the husband and the wife, but it did it between who? Between God and human beings. Even our relationship with Him has been actually affected. But here's the thing. What does God say He wants to do? He wants to dwell with us. He wants to come and be with us. You know, and I shared with you last night, Revelation 3:20 says that Jesus is standing at the door knocking. But as I shared with you last night, where is He in relationship to you? If you are the house, if your marriage is the house, where is Jesus in Revelation 3:20 in relationship to the house? He's standing on the outside as a stranger, knocking to come in. And so within the marriage relationship, Jesus, we need to open that door. We need to allow Christ to come into our lives. And that will make things so much different. Satan tempts people to distrust God's love and to doubt God's wisdom. Satan tempts people to disobedience by leading them to believe that they are entering a wonderful field of knowledge. But all of this is a deception. Satan presents things to us. And the interesting thing is, we do it one time. And we think, well, that's bad. But then the more times that we do it, the more times that we just leave things alone, what happens? Down the road, it's not such a big deal. But what happens? Something else comes up. And then something else comes up. And then all of a sudden down the road, when you finally make the decision to deal with it, no longer are you dealing with one thing, right? Now all of a sudden, everything starts erupting. And now all of a sudden, you feel like I have no control. How am I going to deal with this? Right? And we've all been there. And so we need to have this open communication. We need to talk to each other. We need to have prayer lives. We're going to talk about that too. That we need to have couple prayers where the husband and the wife or the boyfriend and the girlfriend are having a conversation and communication with God together. All too often, it's the wife that has her prayer life, and it's the husband that has his prayer life. Or the relationship has their own. There needs to be a togetherness on this. There needs to be a union with this. At the same time, we are troubled by the fact, again, that too many people do not understand, what does it say? That marriage is a what? What did I say? A blessing and a gift. For instance, when you start looking at statistics of the incidence of divorce, it's mind-boggling. You look at just these, this was the Center of Disease Control Prevention. It says the number of marriages, here is reporting, 2 million. 49 reported states and D.C. Marriage rate 6.9 per thousand. Total population. Divorce rate 3.2 per thousand. That's 40 to 50% of marriages are ending in divorce. And yet many of these are, we're going to look at some other statistics, and 60% of those that remarry do what? End in divorce. And so what happens is you're faced with whatever situation that you're looking at. We'll talk about some tonight. You give in. And all of a sudden you feel like the grass is greener on the other side, that I can find another man that can fulfill those things that my husband doesn't. But then you find someone else, and there are areas of that person being fulfilled for you, but then you're going to miss many of the things that you appreciated in your husband. And that's why it says that once you remarry, what's happening? Oftentimes, 60% of those marriages end. Because again, you have the wrong idea of what it is that you're looking at. Here's another thing here. This is from the Witherspoon Institute Public Discourse. This was in 2015. It says the major factors that determine a couple's risk for divorce include. Now again, I'm going to show you some of these. It doesn't mean that you have to, right? We said if Christ is a part of this, you can overcome these things. But I'm just going to show you some of these facts. Cohabitation. This is incredible when I hear people say cohabitating couples have a 50 to 80% higher likelihood of divorce than non-cohabiting couples. I don't know how many times I've heard people say, I've got to live with them before I marry them to see if we can coexist together. That's not what works. Again, I'm showing you the statistics, but again, that's not what works. And I've even seen, we'll talk about this in a minute, with, I don't know if you've heard this before, people will say, well, I've got to try him or her on before we can get married to see if we work together or not. I mean, again, this kind of thought is actually counterproductive, because the more mates that you end up having, you see what I'm saying by mates, because you become one with every person that you're with. Each of those mates actually makes it more difficult for you in your relationship to be satisfied, because now you've got this mate that has this way, this mate, and the more partners that you have, it actually is counterproductive, and we'll talk about this here in a minute. But the idea of cohabitating, 50 to 80% more likely to end in divorce. Age. Those who marry after 18 have a 24% reduced risk of divorce. And I'm going to show you some statistics here in a minute. What we're finding in the world today is people are actually getting married at an older age. I remember my mother, I believe she was married at 18 or 19 years old. Today, that number is way higher now. But again, those who marry after 18 have a 24% reduced risk of divorce, because think about it. When I was 18 years old, did I really know what I wanted? I didn't even know who I was. How in the world can I find someone to be married to that I didn't know? Now again, that I know other people who have been married at a younger age that have been together for 60 years. So that's why I'm trying to tell you, this isn't everything. Okay? If Christ is a part of that, it's possible. But this is just the probabilities. Age difference. You're finding, look at the media today. Holy cow, right? All these different celebrities that are having all these marriages that are 25 and 30-year difference. Most of them, I don't even read the news too much, but you hear about them. They all end in divorce. Marriages where there's a significant difference in age have twice the risk of divorce than those in which the couples are close in age. Why? Well, because someone who is, let's say for instance, it's a 60-year-old guy and a 20-some-odd-year-old girl. What's the 60-year-old guy accomplished in his life? He probably has grandchildren. He probably has a grandchild that's the same age as the girl that he's with. You think that creates some tension in the relationship? Sure it does. And so it causes a lot of problems. As I said, it's twice the risk. Education, this is interesting too. It says that there's a 27%, only 27% of college graduates will divorce by middle age. So the idea of having education seems to be a very important part of the marriage relationship. Family background, having parents who have never divorced reduces risk by 14%. Oftentimes, again, as a child, you are, and we'll see more of this when we come back for our parenting one on Wednesday night, but children, they are watching. They are absorbing everything they see. And the critical age is in the younger, these young kids up to about 8 years of age, that's a critical place. And they're watching mom and dad. And if they see mom and dad with no communication, they see mom and dad with arguing and all this, they're raised in that kind of environment, the potential risk of divorce for them is higher, because that's what they're seeing. And so it really puts an accountability on our part in rearing our children. And we'll talk about more of that on Wednesday. But family background is also marital history. Being previously divorced markedly elevates one risk of divorce, and we kind of touched on that a little bit. It says having a collective annual household income of $50,000 or more is associated with about a 30% lower divorce risk. But we've got to be careful with this, because sometimes I've seen some that are in lower income than $50,000 that have a better family value than someone who has over $100,000. Because what happens with many of the $100,000, not all, I'm just saying, many of those that are extremely wealthy don't have time for their children. They don't have time for their spouse. The husband is off doing his business, the wife is off doing her business, they have no relationship, and then when the kids finally are reared by whoever's rearing them, because it's not their parents, when the husband and wife are finally at that middle age that we talked about before, they have nothing in common because they've been living separate lives. And so again, income plays a role in this too. I don't want to be extremely rich, I don't want to be really poor. So there's this kind of a medium, is what we're talking about here. Beliefs going into a marriage, a husband and a wife holding a strong personal conviction that marriage for life protects against divorce. Beliefs is very important. The Bible even talks about how we should be equally yoked and not unequally yoked. We should have similar belief systems, right, that they have. And if it doesn't, if you've got, let's say for instance, you've got the female, and oftentimes this is true, that the female tends to be the spiritual leader in the house. But this is dangerous because the Bible says it should be the husband that's the spiritual leader. Okay? And so if you've got this role reversal, what happens? The mother ends up being the one that's bringing the kids to church. The mother is playing that role when the dad isn't. What does that do? It causes some turmoil. And so we really have to think about how our children are perceiving. They both need to be involved in that. And sometimes the husband needs to recognize his role as the spiritual leader of the church, in the household. Religion, again, those with a strong common faith have a 7 to 14% lower risk of divorce. However, having a nominal faith has no protective effect. It's interesting, you think about it. If you have an accountability to something outside of yourself, there's a different response, right? If you have a relationship with God and you see where God is in relationship to you, you want to please Him because it's outside of that. But if you don't care, if you don't have any strong religious beliefs at all, you don't care. There's no level of accountability for you. And so having some sort of belief is necessary. A common faith is necessary. Again, 7 to 14% lower risk. Childbearing. Having one's first child after marriage reduces risk, divorce risk, somewhere between, again, it's a large area, between 24 to 66%. Now, does that mean that having a child prior to marriage means you're going to fail? No, as I said. There's many that have been successful. But again, statistically, it says having one's child after marriage, in the marriage relationship, leads to more common staying together rather than divorce. A desire for children. This was interesting, too. I've experienced this, not in my life, but in dealing with other people, that the wife wanted children, but the husband did not. And here it says that a marriage in which the wife desires children, but the husband does not, is at a 50% greater risk of divorce. And this couple that I know actually did end in divorce because she wanted children. He didn't. He had already had children from a previous relationship, and he didn't want any more. And so they ended up ending in divorce. You can see here, as I was telling you before, this is the comparing between 2010 and 1980. So you can see here the difference in age. So for men, in 1980, you can see here it went from 25 to 28 as far as being in that relationship, marriage relationship. And the female has gone from 22 to 26. Then as far as having children, it's raised from about 23 to 25. You could probably even say that this is average. There are some that's even more extreme than this. I mean, think about it. I got married at 25. So I'm almost right on. But I didn't have my first child until I was 35. So I'm outside this range. But you can see more of the young adults today, 30s and 40s, are starting to have children in marriage later in life than they were back in the 1980s or before. It's actually increasing more and more. To be honest with you, when I think about it, if I had had a kid when I was 18, I would have gone crazy. I think now that I'm older, I'm a little bit more humble, I'm a little bit more laid back, and I can handle things. I don't think I would have been able to handle it when I was 18. But that's just me. But again, there are many that have had children and have done very well. Number 12, it says that sexual history. Marrying as non-virgins is associated with considerably higher risk of divorce and dramatically more unstable first marriages. And that's why I think this is, as I said before, is the unstable. If you've got multiple partners that you've had coming into that marriage relationship, it actually is counterproductive. Because now you've experienced all these different things, and then your spouse cannot fulfill, because what are you going to do? You're going to think in your mind, even if it's subconsciously, you're going to think in your mind about previous sexual relationships. And you're going to say that your current spouse does not measure up to this relationship that you had in the past. And so what do you try to do? In your relationship, you try to pull your spouse to get what it is that you had in your past. And so multiple partners is actually really counterproductive to the relationship. It creates this instability in the relationship. Now, again, as I said, if you are where you are and that's where you are, that's your experience in your past, Jesus Christ in your relationship, in your marriage, if there's communication and there's a religious component, spiritual component, that you can work through these things and have a much more stable relationship. But again, these are just things. 13, smoking. It's interesting. Couples in which one partner smokes and the other does not are markedly more likely to divorce compared to couples in which neither spouse does. Marriages in which both smoke were more often than twice as likely to dissolve compared with non-smoking couples. Interesting. So a lot of these statistics are out there. This one here is a 2005 study. It says that researchers have identified the most common reasons for people to give for their divorces. And a recent national survey found that the most common reason for divorce was lack of commitment. 73% said that was a major reason. Other significant reasons included too much arguing, infidelity, marrying too young, unrealistic expectations, lack of equality in the relationship, lack of preparation for marriage, and abuse. People often give more than, you see what that says there? People often give more than one reason. So the percentages add up to more than 100%. And I'm willing to bet that this last category here with the abuse, I would say that it's probably higher because most are not reporting it. Most are living with it. And I'm not talking about necessarily just physical abuse. I'm talking about emotional abuse in varying forms. Many of them go untaught. They don't talk about it. They don't communicate. And they live with it. And again, I'm almost positive that number is much more realistically higher than what's being reported there. Institute of American Values. This one says, does divorce make people happy? Findings from a study of unhappy marriages using the National Survey of Families and Households. It says we look at all spouses who were in the late 80s, rated their marriages unhappy. 5 years later, the same adults were re-interviewed. So we were able to follow unhappy spouses as their lives took different paths. In the interim, some had divorced or separated, some stayed married. Because marital strife takes a toll on psychological well-being, the conventional wisdom would argue that unhappily married adults who divorced would be better off, happier, less depressed, with greater self-esteem and a stronger sense of personal mastery compared to staying married. How do you think that turned out? No, it wasn't. They weren't happier. They weren't less depressed. There wasn't greater self-esteem. It was worse. It was counter to that. Exactly the opposite. It says that unhappily married adults who divorced or separated were no happier, on average, than happily married adults who stayed married. Even unhappy spouses who had divorced and remarried were no happier on average than unhappy spouses who stayed married. Isn't that incredible? Okay. And so again, part of this, as I said, is this level of communication. Thinking that things are going to be better if you get away from them doesn't really deal with the issue, because all that happens, it's the same thing. You've probably heard people say that, oh, they had a bad experience in this one area of their life, and you know what's best? They just need to move. They need to move away and find a different state to live in and start fresh. But what's the reality? All you do is you just transplant the very things that you were dealing with where you were before and bring them with you to where you're going. And it's the same thing in the marriage relationship. Just moving on and divorcing and finding another spouse does not solve the issue. The issue needs to be resolved. It says divorce did not reduce symptoms of even depression for unhappily married adults, or raise their self-esteem, or increase their sense of mastery on average, compared to unhappy spouses who stayed married. The vast majority of divorces, 74%, happened to adults who had been happily married 5 years previously. In this group, divorce was associated with dramatic declines in happiness and psychological well-being compared to those who stayed married. So leaving the spouse, walking away, giving up, actually led to more unhappiness, more depression, more psychological, the well-being was actually went down. And so again, it's very important. Unhappy marriages were less common than unhappy spouses. 3 out of 4 unhappily married adults were married to someone who was happy with the marriage. Interesting. Very interesting. This also says that staying married did not typically trap unhappy spouses in violent relationships. 86% of unhappily married adults reported no violence in their relationship, including 77% of unhappy spouses who later divorced or separated. 93% of unhappy spouses who avoided divorce reported no violence in their marriage 5 years later. Why? Because they addressed the issues. That's the only answer. They must have addressed the issues to stay in that marriage relationship. And so getting divorced doesn't fix it. Oftentimes I would find that people who were divorced would go back into a relationship. If they were in an abusive relationship, what would happen? They would remarry into another abusive relationship. You know how many times I've seen this happen? Over and over and over again. 2 out of 3 unhappily married adults who avoided divorce or separation ended up happily married 5 years later. Just 1 out of 5 of unhappy spouses who divorced or separated had happily remarried in the same time period. Many currently happy married spouses have had extended periods of marital unhappiness, often for quite serious reasons, including alcoholism, infidelity, verbal abuse, emotional neglect, depression, illness, and work reversals. It's interesting. You can even go to the Bible, and I'm not going to spend some time, because again, in this series, I can't address everything, because we're limited on our time. But in the Bible, many of these things, the infidelity, the abuse, many of those things are permissible for divorce. But the reality is, if you stay in a marriage relationship and actually deal with those issues, if you get through those issues, your marriage is actually stronger. The bond is actually stronger if you stay the course. Spouses who turn their marriages around seldom reported that counseling even played a role. This is interesting. The counseling played a role. When husbands behaved badly, value-neutral counseling was not reported by any spouse to be helpful. Instead, wives in these marriages appeared to seek outside help from others to pressure the husband to change his behavior. Men displayed a strong preference for religious counseling. This is interesting. Listen to this. Men displayed a strong preference for religious counselors over secular ones because they believed that these counselors would not encourage divorce. This is true. You don't know how many times I have seen secular counselors. I had a friend of mine that went to a secular counselor that actually in this counseling told them that they needed to get divorced. And incredible that they would do that. Rather than if you were in a religious one, that it says here, would not encourage divorce. And again, divorce is permissible in some of these circumstances, but if you stay the course, it just strengthens that bond. And so there's a lot of major findings that we have found in here. But the one thing, the key role, as I was saying, is the fact that the two of them are communicators, talking to one another, working through these things. And so we saw that God bestowed the gift of marriage for the human race. And when you look at this photo, let me ask you, what does this photo describe to you that's taking place? What do you see in this photograph? How would you describe it? Any words that come to your mind? Well, yeah? Okay, they're truly in love. Okay? What else? What else do you see in this photograph?
There's communication.
Communication, okay. What else? Anything else you can see in this picture?
And eye contact.
Eye contact, okay. Yeah.
Harmony.
Harmony? Yeah. Okay. Maybe harmony? I guess you're a guy, like me, right? There you go. But definitely communication. Right? Definitely communication. Listen to this. This was a Minnesota Family Institute wrote this, and it says, it is interesting to note that a significant number of divorced individuals, maybe even half, reported to researchers that they wished that they or their ex-spouse had done what? What's it say? Tried harder to work through their differences. But oftentimes we just say, forget it. You know, I'll just find someone else. This one prominent marriage researcher and therapist, his name is Dr. Scott Stanley at the University of Denver, defines commitment as having a long-term view of the marriage that helps us not get overwhelmed by the problems and challenges day to day. We keep our eyes focused on the valued prize. What's the prize? A healthy, stable marriage. And what? Work to get there. Right? That's what our focus is. Not something else, but that we have that valued prize with each other. As we noted above, the number one reason people give for why their marriage didn't succeed is a lack of commitment and communication on both the spouses' parts. Listen to this. George Bernard Shaw says the single biggest problem in communication is the what? The illusion that it has taken place. Oftentimes in our marriage relationships, we say that that's happening. The husband say, oh, we talk all the time. And then you go and ask the wife if that's happened, and she goes, what talking is happening in this relationship? Right? Or vice versa. This needs to happen. There needs to. One person, who was it that said eye contact? I heard it from someone who said there was eye contact. Yeah. Okay? Eye contact. That means when you're having communication, in order to make sure that your spouse knows what you're saying, you need to be looking at each other. You're not doing a job. You're not walking up the stairs while your wife is telling you something. And you go, yeah, I hear you, I hear you. Okay? It's standing in each other's presence, looking each other in the eye, and listening to one another. Part of communication is listening. It's taking time. That's important, right? Taking time to work through these things. Let me tell you something, guys. If you're sitting down with your wife and you're listening to what I'm not saying you're fixing it. Now see, there's the problem. We're going to talk about this here in a minute. When your wife comes to you with something that's going on in her life, she's not looking for you to fix it. We're fix-its. That's what men are. Okay? We're good at fixing things. And we think when our wife comes, then we get into that mode, we've got to fix it. Your wife is not looking for you to fix it. She's looking for you to just shut up and listen. Okay? And so it's time for us to just zip the lip and listen to make the eye contact and listen to what she has to say. Okay? And so we're going to talk about this a little bit more in a minute. But this is not, would you consider this proper communication? Guys, do you think your wife would approve of this sort of communication? Yep. Probably not, okay? How about this other way around? Do you think your wife enjoys this sort of communication? Yep. Is this even communication? No. No, this isn't accomplishing anything, is it? Okay. What about this? Is that appropriate communication? Sometimes. Sometimes? Okay, I think sometimes. Okay. All right, it doesn't work. When you get married, is that how you get married? You have your boxing gloves on? Yeah. Now, is there times that you're going through some difficult things in your marriage relationship? Yeah, sure. But you've got to communicate. You've got to talk to each other and work through these things. Now, if you work at this relationship, does that mean that after being married for 40 years, it's all worked out? No. Does it mean after 60 years, it's all worked out? No. Okay. It's a relationship. It's the same thing in our relationship with God. We don't just pray once and then have it all. We don't just grab our Bible and read one verse and say, I'm done, right? We continue to grow in our relationship and our knowledge of God. Well, it's the same thing in the marriage relationship. If you truly love each other, you're going to be discovering something about your wife from the day you say I do until the day that you have your last breath. It should be a marriage journey as you learn more and more about each other each and every day. This is interesting. I just spent some time studying the human brain between men and women, and it was quite interesting what I found. A team at the University of Pennsylvania scanned the brains of nearly 1,000 men, women, boys, and girls and found a striking difference. To look at brain connectivity, the researchers used a type of scan called the DTI, a water-based imaging technique that can trace and highlight the fiber pathways connecting the different regions of the brain. Okay? So up here you can see in the blue is the man's brain, and here below is a woman's brain. Okay? The male brains appear to be wired, as you can see here, back and forth with few connections bridging the two hemispheres of the brain. Whereas the female, her pathways are crisscrossed between the left and the right brain. I wonder why it is that men, again, this is not all men, but on average, that men are better task-oriented than women. Okay? A man, when I say task-oriented, I don't mean multiple tasks. I'm talking about one task. Okay? So a man can make up his mind to do one thing, and he does that one thing very well. But when it comes to multitasking, on average, men don't do well. Again, as you can see, our hemispheres aren't communicating as well as the woman's is here as it's going across. It's interesting, I saw a study that even in babies, they were looking at the level of communication in babies as they were in the hospital, and they saw that female babies talked a lot when they were in their cribs, and males were very quiet. Okay? It's actually true. And I always tell guys, in the marriage relationship, where do we learn how to communicate? Most single men have a hard time in communication. We learn how to communicate from our spouses. Our spouses actually teach, the women teach the men how to communicate, how to socialize, how to interact. We learn that from the women in our relationship. Now again, I'm not saying that's 100%, but on average, the men do that from learning from the women. They think these differences, again, as I said, might explain why men in general tend to be better at learning and performing a single task, whereas women are more equipped for multitasking, says the researchers in the journal. Okay? I want to show you, I don't know how many of you have ever seen this before, but I want to show you just this short 5-minute clip.
Men's brains are very unique. Men's brains are made up of little boxes. And we have a box for everything. We've got a box for the car. We've got a box for the money. We've got a box for the job. We've got a box for you. We've got a box for the kids. We've got a box for your mother somewhere in the basement. We got boxes everywhere. And the rule is, the boxes don't touch. When a man discusses a particular subject, we go to that particular box, we pull that box out, we open the box, we discuss only what is in that box. All right? And then we close the box and put it away, being very, very careful not to touch any other boxes. Now, women's brains are very, very different from men's brains. Women's brains are made up of a big ball of wire. And everything is connected to everything. Money's connected to the car, and the car's connected to your job, and your kids are connected to your mother, and everything's connected to everything. It's like the internet superhighway. And it's all driven by energy that we call emotion. It's one of the reasons why women tend to remember everything. Because if you take an event and you connect it to an emotion, it burns in your memory and you can remember forever. The same thing happens for men. It just doesn't happen very often because, quite frankly, we don't care. Women tend to care about everything. And she just loves it. Okay? Now, men, we have a box in our brain that most women are not aware of. This particular box has nothing in it. In fact, we call it the nothing box. And of all the boxes a man has in his brain, the nothing box is our favorite box. If a man has a chance, he'll go to his nothing box every time. That's why a man can do something seemingly completely brain dead for hours on end. You know, like fishing. Now, they've actually measured this. The University of Pennsylvania a couple of years ago did a study and discovered that men have the ability to think about absolutely nothing and still breathe. You know, they connect to all the wires and stuff like that, watch their brain activity, and all of a sudden, I believe he's dead! Huh? And women can't do it. They can't do it. Their minds never stop. And they don't understand the nothing box. And it drives them crazy. Because nothing drives them
go online, or you can even order. I don't know, have you ever seen Laughing Your Way to a Better Marriage? It's definitely worth getting a hold of. Just Laughing Your Way to a Better Marriage, and the gentleman that does it is Mark Younger. And it's definitely worth getting a hold of. If you could just even sit down with your spouse and watch that, it's definitely worth it. You know, there's a lot of different examples that we have in the Bible of relationships. Abraham and Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob and Rachel, Boaz, Ruth, Elkanah and Hannah, all these different ones. The one that I want to just spend a little time reading with the scripture with you is this marriage relationship between Boaz and Ruth. And I just want you to notice some things as we read through this. In Ruth chapter 2, it says, "And it so happened that Naomi had a relative by marriage, a man prominent and rich, connected with Elimelech's family. His name was Boaz. One day Ruth, the Moabite, a foreigner, said to Naomi, 'I'm going to work. I'm going out to glean among the sheaves, following after some harvesters who will treat me kindly.' And Naomi said, 'Go ahead, dear daughter,' and so she set out. She went and started gleaning in a field, following in the wake of the harvesters. And eventually she ended up in the part of the field owned by Boaz, her father-in-law Elimelech's relative. A little later, Boaz came out from Bethlehem, greeting his harvesters. 'God be with you,' he says. They replied, 'And God bless you,' Boaz asked his young servant, who was the foreman over the farm hands, 'Who is this young woman? Where does she come from?' The foreman said, 'Well, that's the Moabite girl, the one who came with Naomi from the country of Moab. She asked permission, let me glean,' she said, 'and gather among the sheaves following after your harvesters. She's been at it steady ever since, from early morning until now, without much as a break.' Then Boaz spoke to Ruth, 'Listen, my daughter, from now on don't go to any other field to glean. Stay right here in this one, and stay close to my young men. Watch where they are harvesting and follow them, and don't worry about a thing. I've given orders to my servants not to harass you. When you get thirsty, feel free to go and drink from the water buckets that the servants have filled.' So she dropped to her knees and then bowed her face to the ground. 'How does this happen, that you should pick me out of and treat me so kindly, me a foreigner?' And Boaz answered her, 'I've heard all about you, heard about the way you treated your mother-in-law after the death of her husband, and how you left your father and mother in the land of your birth and have come to live among a bunch of total strangers. God reward you well for what you've done, and with a generous bonus besides from God, to whom you have come seeking protection under his wings.' She said, 'Oh, sir, such grace, such kindness, I don't deserve. You've touched my heart. Treat me like one of your own, and I don't even belong here. I heard about you, heard about the way you treated your mother. Oh, sir, such grace and kindness, you've touched my heart,' right? Is what it says. So Boaz begins having feelings for Ruth, and later on in the story, he gathers the town elders for business. Okay? So let's go to Ruth chapter 4. It continues, and it says that Boaz then said to his relative, 'The piece of property that belonged to our relative Elimelech is being sold by his widow Naomi, who has just returned from the country of Moab. I thought you ought to know about it. Buy it back if you want it. You can make it official in the presence of those sitting here and before the town elders. You have first redeemer rights. If you don't want it, tell me so I'll know where I stand. You're first in line to do this, and I am next after you.' He said, 'I'll buy it.' Then Boaz added, 'You realize, don't you, that when you buy the field from Naomi, you also get Ruth, the Moabite, the widow of our dead relative, along with the redeemer, responsible to have children with her to carry on the family inheritance.' Then the relative said, 'Oh, I can't do that. I jeopardize my own family's inheritance.' And so then Boaz said to his relative, 'The piece of property that belonged to our relative Elimelech is being sold by his widow Naomi, who has just returned from the country of Moab. I thought you ought to know about it. Buy it back if you want it. You can make it official in the presence of those sitting here and before the town elders.' Okay? And then it goes on to say, 'You have first redeemer rights.' He'll tell him he can have it if he wants it, right? It's interesting what he's doing here is he's telling him this information. And he's telling him it on purpose. Because I believe that what he's trying to say is that I want her for myself. And so he's presenting this, and he says, I can't do this. And so when he addresses the elders of the people, he says, 'You are witnesses today of what I have bought from Naomi, everything that belonged to Elimelech, and Kilion and Mahlon, including responsibility for Ruth the foreigner, the widow of Mahlon. I'll take her as my wife and keep the name of the deceased alive along with his inheritance. And Boaz married Ruth. She became his wife. And Boaz slept with her. By God's gracious gift, she conceived and had a son. His name was Obed. He was the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of David. Okay? So when I begin to look at this relationship, okay, this relationship, and you start looking at what's a model that God has for us, one of the things that we see is that Naomi was a survivor. But she was returning with how much? Nothing. Ruth had left the gods of Moab behind and chose to put her faith in the hands of Naomi's God and his people without any idea of how things would work out. In the midst, number two, is in the midst of their loss, God was orchestrating an amazing plan that generations later would affect all of humanity through the coming of God's chosen Redeemer, Jesus Christ. This is very important because I believe that in each of our marriage relationships, that it's not coincidence that we're together. I believe that God has brought each of us together. And so why would I want to break apart something that God has brought together? And I think it's the same thing as here. Ruth's request to spread out the corner of your garment over me had several meanings, each of which highlighted her desire to be a faithful part of the community of God's people. The actual word corner in the Hebrew means wings. So Ruth was asking Boaz, protect me like a bird protects her young. Be my redeemer as God commanded in the Torah, so that in your actions, your provision, and your family, and I will find God's protection. See that triune relationship right there? And take me as your wife, for in your protection, I find God's provision and protection. That's what the marriage relationship should be. The wife should feel what when she's with her husband?
Secure.
Secure, safe, right? There should be a level of trust, of faith. So what words can you think of when you're looking at this marriage relationship between Ruth and Boaz? We just talked about some. We see this trust. We see this what? What were some of the other words that we just were describing? I've got my list. Self-sacrifice, right? Patience, kindness, responsibility, taking the initiative, being open and sincere. All of these things were in that relationship between Boaz and Ruth. And I think it needs to be a necessary component in our marriage relationships. Self-sacrificing. Are we willing to do that? Or are we so filled with self that I'm not willing to do that? The patience and the kindness. Do we not have to be patient and kind with one another at times? Do the husbands ever frustrate the wives? Everyone's silent. Does the husband frustrate the wife? Yeah, I'm sure I frustrate my wife all the time. And then she's kind and patient with me. Is there a level of responsibility in her? Is there a need for being open and sincere with one another? Yeah. Because what is it that you have with one another? There's a love, isn't there? There's an appreciation for one another. And so it's a necessary component. This was interesting. This was from the American Psychological Association. It said every relationship has its ups and downs. But some factors are more likely than others to create bumps in a relationship. Finances, parenting decisions often create recurring conflicts, for example. Romantic relationships are important for our happiness and well-being. And I'm going to give you some steps that can help take to keep your romantic partnership in good working order. But yeah, finances is the main thing. It's a big thing. All right? Parenting decisions, especially if you're getting into a relationship where one of the spouses had children prior, that you're the stepmom and the stepdad. How does that work in that marriage relationship? It creates a lot of turmoil. So let's look at some of these steps it says. It says that one thing, and we've already talked about a little bit, we said that there needs to be what? Open talking. Communication is a key piece of a healthy relationship. Try to spend a few minutes each day discussing deeper and more personal subjects to stay connected with your partner over the long term. That's an important part. That's number one. Number two, or not number two, but just going on a little bit more with this, disagreements are a part of any partnership. But some fighting styles are particularly damaging. Couples that use destructive behavior during arguments, such as yelling, such as demeaning, I mean, those kind of things, that's not what's helping. Resorting to personal criticisms, withdrawing from the discussion, I'm done, I don't want to talk about this anymore, I'm finished, are more likely to break up than are couples that are fighting destructively. Examples of constructive strategies for resolving disagreements include attempting to find out exactly what your partner is feeling. listening to his or her point of view and trying to make him or her laugh. I mean, this part here about knowing what they're feeling is difficult. We just saw that men's and women's brains are different. So the husband isn't going to 100% understand or feel what it is the spouse is going through, or vice versa. But still, there needs to be a component of listening, of talking, of communicating. 2, it says that keeping it interesting. I mean, think about it. You've got kids, careers, outside commitments. It makes it difficult to stay connected with your partner. But we need to make reasonable effort. I was raised when I was a child that my dad, every week, my dad was a roofer. And he worked till when the sun came up until the sun went down. And it was like that 6 days a week. And so, but my dad specifically made every Thursday, I remember even now, every Thursday, we used to go out and go fishing. And it was no matter what, we always went fishing. And I've been doing that with my family here now too, is that we try every Thursday to go out fishing. And I think it's important to have something. It doesn't matter what it is. And then at the same time, it's good for you to find someone to take care of your kids so that you and your spouse can go out and meet together. You have to make that time. You have to force that time in. To keep things interesting, some couples, like I said, you could plan regular date nights. Even dates can get old, though, if you're always renting a movie or going to the same restaurant. Experts recommend breaking out of the routine and trying new things. Intimacy is also a critical component of romantic relationships. Some busy couples find it helpful to schedule sex by putting it on the calendar. It may not be spontaneous to have it written in ink, but setting aside time for intimate encounters helps ensure that your physical and emotional needs are being met. So again, you have to just think outside of the box. You have to keep things fresh. You have to find different things for each other to do, to spend time together, quality time together. You know, just saying that I was in the same room with you is not quality time. If the wife is sitting on the couch reading a book and the husband's watching a football game, that is not quality time. Well, the husband may say, well, I was with you for 3 hours tonight. That's not really with her. You need to actually say, no, we're going to break away from this and spend quality time together with each other. Actually, I found this also. It gives us 7 health benefits of being in a happy marriage. This is quite interesting. You may be less likely to die of cancer. This was incredible. This is a 2013 study published in the Journal of Clinical Oncology of nearly 1.3 million patients diagnosed with various types of cancer found that married men and women were less likely than single people to have disease that had spread, more likely to receive treatment in a timely manner. That's true for us men, right? Who is the one that takes the guy to the hospital? It's the wife that says, come on now, get your butt in the hospital. It's the way it is, okay? In that kind of relationship. Because what does the guy want to do? The guy says, oh, I can handle it. It's nothing major, right? And the wife is, oh, I handle this way with my wife was. Always. It says, and it says that less likely to die as a result of their ailment. Men saw a greater overall protective benefit than women. But the association remained true regardless of the type of cancer involved. Research report. It's the same thing in my mom and dad. My dad does something and he's like, nah, I'm fine. My mother says, get up, we're going. And she gets him to go and do these things. So again, it's necessary. Number 2, this is interesting. It also helps to better protect from heart disease. It says being married may significantly reduce a man's chance of dying from heart disease. A 2007 study published in the Journal of Psychosomatic Medicine suggests that after accounting for age, blood pressure, body mass index, cholesterol, and other lifestyle choices, researchers found that married men were almost half as likely as unmarried men to die 10 years after being diagnosed with heart disease. You know why I think this is? Because a single guy is cooking his food. And in most marriage relationships, not all, but a lot of marriage relationships, it's the wife that's cooking. So you're probably eating healthy or healthier in a marriage relationship than you are when you're single. So again, that kind of fits in with that too. Any husbands here that do the cooking instead of one? All right, we got one. All right. 2 of you. All right, that's good. That's good. Just be careful. All right? Be careful. It says 3, it's even stroke. This is just incredible. So being a single or unhappily married man shows this triune relationship. And I thought, I'm just going to share with you. It says 2 people, 2 hearts. The story does tell. Both of them in love, they did fell. I wasn't a great poet, so just bear with me. One moment alone and empty, lacking in part, far from each other, but not from one's heart. And the heart of one brought them together to stay from now and forever. The heart of one is larger than yours or mine, larger than all 3 hearts combined, or 2 hearts combined. For it is the heart of one that brought us together to stay from now and forever. No one can break that which is made, a bond of such strength only He can forbade. For if through our lives from start to finish, He is our focus, never to diminish. He will sustain us, whatever the measure, whatever the cost, for in His own pleasure. Worry and quarrel may envision our life, but patience, strength, and commitment will overcome whatever the strife. For the heart of one brought us together to stay from now and forever. From now we are young till when we are old, one still remains, which is love in twofold. Love for each other is that which we hold, but love for our Father is that which we mold. For it is in the heart of God that has brought us together to stay from now and forever. And so again, I think that in our lives, this is what's a necessary component. We help them to continue to grow in their relationship, to spend time, quality time with each other, listening to each other, talking to each other, communicating with each other, and be spending time studying together and praying together as they recognize the importance of their marriage relationship as well as their relationship with you. That it would continue to grow. That no matter what hardships they come up against, they will get through because they value their marriage relationship and they value you. So Lord, I just ask you to continue to be with us throughout this entire series as Wednesday night we talk about parenting and raising up our children. And just be with us throughout this entire thing. We just love you so very much. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So again,